All right. So this is an interview prep workshop. This is like different from the workshop y'all had previously. The goal of this is kind of like to prepare you for the interview process itself. So we'll go over like technical details, discuss like good interviewing techniques when it comes to like technical questions, and talk a bit also about like HR rounds, which are more like questions about you as like a developer and also questions about you as a person. So we'll talk about these things, and then I'll also provide some resources, and at the end, some of the hack orgs have actually volunteered to mock interview people, and we'll basically be posting those links. So if you want to do practice interviews with them, you can use the links to sign up for a time slot with them, and you'll be mock interviewed by hack. All right, so let's get this started. And why is this not moving? All right, there we go. Yeah, this is what I just said. A little bit about myself with the blurry picture. I'm a third year computer science student at UCI. I'm currently in San Jose, but like I also like travel a bit, so like I also live in San Francisco sometimes. Right, so the interview format. So generally, like your entire interview process will consist of these things. Usually I'll start off with the online coding challenge, generally on HackerRank. Some people use CodeSignal, but essentially it's you're given about an hour to 2 hours, and you're given 2 to 4 problems that you're supposed to solve. It's completely online. There's no interview or anything like that. After that, it depends. So usually like it'll either be like an HR round, which is either the first or last round you'll encounter. In this round, they'll just ask you questions about you as a developer. They'll ask you questions like, tell me a bit about yourself, and you'll tell them about your technical background. If you have previous experience, they'll go over your resume, make sure you didn't lie on your resume just by like asking you more specific questions about it and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm referring to as the HR round. But usually it's done by either a project manager or an actual like technical recruiter. Then there's usually 2 to 3 technical phone video interviews. These interviews usually involve like 1 to 2 technical questions, like leak code style. And basically you're supposed to like talk through your process on how you're doing it. There'll also be like an interactive like playground, like a coding playground, in which basically the recruiter will ask you to code during the interview itself. So there's like 2 to 3 of these usually. And then depending on companies, so some companies do this, others don't. There'll be like a 2 to 3 hour virtual. Currently it'll be a virtual onsite. Usually it's an onsite, they'll fly you out, etc. But in these times, like it'll be a virtual onsite. So it'll be like a 2 to 3 hour thing on Zoom, and and it won't just be with one person. So it'll be like multiple things. There'll maybe be 2 to 3 interviewers. There might be like another HR round in there. There might just be full technical rounds, but that can kind of vary a bit. But this is kind of what you should expect generally given like an interview process. These are kind of the things you should be expecting. Okay, so first we'll talk about coding challenges. I'll also post a slide on the Discord, but these are just resources that we would recommend that you look into. There's obviously LeetCode. I'm has anybody not heard of LeetCode here? All right, that sounds about right. So there's LeetCode. Career Cup is sort of similar to LeetCode, but Career Cup is like it's an older form of LeetCode. Older in the sense that like it's not as used anymore, but it used to be like the LeetCode of like 4 years ago. There's also HackerRank, which is kind of, in my opinion, like HackerRank has a better build up than LeetCode does. Basically, like I think HackerRank has like easier problems, but they ramp up really fast. So HackerRank is also a good place to like test out your skill. Also because like interviews are usually like the first coding challenge I mentioned is usually done through HackerRank, so it's a good idea to be familiar with the platform, etc. Um, CodeSignal is another one. CodeSignal is usually like not a lot of companies have started using CodeSignal yet, but it's a great way to kind of like familiarize yourself if you haven't taken some of the more advanced like algorithms courses. CodeSignal has a really good way of like not only giving you practice, but also teaching you along the way. So we'd recommend CodeSignal for that. CodeSignal also, in some cases like Robinhood and Databricks that I know of, they request your CodeSignal score, which is basically an assessment out of 850 points. It's usually 3 questions. And basically they just assess you on your programming ability, how many test cases you passed, and also the time it took you to pass them. Also like the cleanliness of your code. So that's what CodeSignal is. And yeah, so basically the higher score you get, like the better off you are for like companies that request that score from you. And the last resource is just your friends. Like most of you have been going through this interview process, and most of you will go through this process. So you all have like at least a little bit of an idea as to what's going on in the interview process and what to expect. So one thing that you can definitely do is interview your friends, have them interview you, and just practice to get better at like and more comfortable talking, not just being able to solve problems. Okay, so tips and tricks. The most important thing you need to do is talk to the interviewer during the interview. Don't just like quietly start coding. Like you should be talking to them, trying to explain like what you're thinking throughout the whole thing. So like when they give you the question, chances are you don't know what the solution is like 2 seconds after they ask you the question, and they don't expect that either. But you should be talking to them, you know, even if it's like whatever your thought process is, just start talking to them, start like giving them different concepts that you think could potentially work towards the solution. And usually they'll like if they realize that you don't know what's going on, like they'll help you, they'll try to help you understand like how to get to the solution. They won't give it away obviously, but they'll kind of like help you like work with you towards the solution. But it's very important that you keep talking to the recruiter, not just like while you're thinking about the solution or like asking questions about the prompt itself to figure out like the specifics of it. But it's also important that like you talk to them like about your thought process, and so they know that like you didn't just like come up with it right away, or if you didn't come up with it, they know that you didn't like not even try. You thought about it, you tried to solve it, but like you didn't know you weren't able to go all the way. Second off is like when you're talking about pseudocode, or when you're talking about what you're going to do in or what code you're thinking about writing, it's a good idea to mention trade-offs. For example, like if you're going to implement like an OFN function, but that could have been done in O of 1, you can mention that trade-off. And like, for example, you can say that you did it just because to increase the readability of your code or increase the scalability of your code. But you have to mention all those trade-offs so that they understand that you're actually thinking about them and not just like an oblivious mistake that you made. Like you should not, whenever you're writing code, they should understand that you deliberately made that choice and it wasn't just something that you kind of like glanced over and completely like missed. The last thing is a trend I've been noticing more recently. Like this wasn't as big a thing 2 years ago, but it is like more recently. Like what you name your functions and what you name your variables actually matters a lot. So technical recruiters are looking to see whether or not you actually know how to solve the problem, but they're also looking to see how you write code and whether that code is kind of like in line with the company standards on code. So for example, like you should usually not be referencing to a variable as temp, you know, like if you're referring to coordinates, you can call them X and Y or X coordinate and Y coordinate. But it's very important that you name your functions and variables, something that if someone else went over your code, they'd be able to tell you exactly like, or they'd be able to understand what your code is trying to do just based on the way it's written and not necessarily having to go through your entire code to understand what's going on there. The next part that we're going to talk about is the HR manager round. So this is the second part that I mentioned, which is more like behavioral stuff and also just trying to understand more about you as a developer based on your resume and trying to go beyond your resume. So first thing is like know your resume. Like try very hard in life not to lie on your resume. But even if you aren't lying on your resume, like they will still ask you a lot of details about the things that you've said on your resume. And it's very important that you are able to answer, you're able to provide those details. Because if you can't give those details, then they know that you lied or you did not actually do what you said you did on your resume. And that will like hurt your chances of getting into the company a lot. The second thing is try to talk beyond your resume. So they have the piece of paper in front of them. What they want to see is how far deep you can go beyond just what's written on your resume, because recruiters are really trying to make it so that you're not just a piece of paper to them. And so it's very important that you try to be more personable and try to go beyond your resume when you talk about your experiences, when you talk about what you've done, what you've accomplished. It's important that you can talk beyond your resume and not just repeat what is already written on your resume. Another thing is, so recruiters often ask questions like, tell me about a time you faced an adversity, how did you overcome it? Or tell me about a time you had a problem, how did you get help, stuff like that. Those are kind of the more behavioral questions they ask because those are very real things that software engineers deal with on a daily basis. If I didn't have a mentor, I'd have been screwed. But basically, like it's very important that you have stories about these things ready to go. Because when they ask you these questions, usually like an HR round is 30 minutes. So you need to be able to answer these questions and more in less than 30 minutes. So kind of like start thinking about your experiences and build stories so that you know what you can talk about given like certain questions. Like you don't need to know every question in the book, but it's good if you have an idea for like some things that you could potentially talk about. It is a good idea for these stories to be in a technical setting, like for example, you're working on a school project or at your previous internship or whatever, but it's totally fine. Like if you don't have that much technical experience, it's completely okay for you to talk about something else, like another group setting. Even if it was in high school, like it's totally fine for you to talk about something that you faced and how you overcame it. If it's not technical, that's totally fine too. And you don't need to stress too much about that. So these are things that you can prep for in an HR interview. Okay, so now this is the big part of this workshop. This workshop was kind of created kind of as a precursor to this, but the main thing here is that we will be hosting mock interviews. So we have about 8 organizers who have volunteered their time to interview you over the next week. So from today until 7 days from now, next Thursday, we have created a calendars by which you can like register and you'll be able to be interviewed by someone by our organization. All of them will be going over fairly similar interviews and there's no real difference between them. We will be providing you with feedback, all of it. So it'll be a 30-minute conversation with feedback at the end. And the links will be posted on, actually not the general channel as I found out about 5 minutes ago. It will be posted on the announcements channel. My apologies for that. The links will also be posted on the Zoom chat and you can click any of the links. They're all Calendly links. If you're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. Just click on one of the links and you'll be basically given like 7 days on which you can like book a time. Just go through and book a time on Calendly and you'll be given a Zoom link and basically your interview is good to go. And then you just get on there and they'll walk you through a few HR questions. They'll give you a few coding challenges. And then after that, they'll give you feedback on how you did on both of those things. So this is the main part of this workshop that like for this whole week. So make sure you make use of that. And does anyone have any questions? Are they in the chat?
Oh, they're coming out.
Hello. Okay.
Okay, the first question, are we going to have these interview workshops every quarter? No, so usually most technical recruiting seasons are generally in fall, but there are some companies that also recruit in spring. And if we feel like it would be a useful thing to have in spring again, we'll definitely do it in spring as well. How should I approach the interview? Could you elaborate on that question? It's okay if you unmute yourself and prefer to talk instead.
So I'm thinking about getting an internship somewhere just to get my foot into the door and accumulate more experience. But I'm taking ICS 31 right now. I don't have a lot of experience. So how do I approach interviewers? Like to make sure to make like I sound not to make sure like I sound more experienced, but to say like I'm a reliable person, something like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. So there's actually multiple ways of approaching this. There are a lot of companies that have created programs specifically for first and second year internships. So that's definitely like, look out for those. For example, like off the top of my head, Microsoft has Explorer and Google has STEP. So some companies have created like specific first and second year programs. So definitely apply to those. In terms of actually during the interview, like nobody will ask you like how much experience do you have directly or anything like that, but it's all about how you like carry yourself. You know, you don't necessarily need to come off as like the smartest person in the room. In fact, they might not even like that, but it's still very important that you're able to talk and answer their questions. So at the end of the day, it's all about whether you can answer their questions and they like you.
Okay.
And yeah, if you look at the chat, there's also more resources and stuff you can look at. But yeah, if you have more questions, go for it.
So like my approach is to build a couple like personal small projects like I can
Mhm.
show to the interviewers. That's just my plan. Like it don't have to be super complicated, but something I built like a small website or a small app I can show. It doesn't require a lot of experience to do, but I just want to show like I can do something. That's kind of my plan.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. So projects are a really good way of like kind of, at least like if you don't have an internship, it's a good way of showing that one, you're reliable, two, you can actually follow through on ideas that you have, and three, just the fact that you're willing to learn new technologies and implement those technologies. So that is a good thing. And the other advantage of it is also that gives you something to talk about during your interviews. But at the end of the day, like when it comes to an interview, generally like you still need to be practicing on like leak code or something and be able to like answer the technical questions that they give you.
What's the difference between this club and ACM?
This club hosts hackathons. This is a workshop that we're doing just to like help people and host mock interviews so that they have more practice. But Hack as an organization is one of our bigger purposes is to host hackathons. So for example, ZaHacks coming up in November and Hack UCI coming up in winter quarter. These are kind of the main events that we host.
What about ACM, the super popular?
Yeah, so like Arita said, ACM is a competitive programming club. So they do a lot of like, so ACM hosts competitions in which the ACM club competes, or people from the ACM club generally compete in, and they focus very much on competitive programming. Hack as an organization doesn't focus on that, but this is something that we felt is important going into this year, especially given COVID, et cetera. We felt that having more interview prep and being able to like practice better going into interviews is definitely like a key thing that would be pivotal to careers. So we felt like hosting this workshop.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have questions?
Eric asks, is there an attire requirement for the mock interview? No. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just us, so like casual is fine. But for a real interview, yes, you should definitely wear like a button up or something.
Yeah.
One thing to note for real interviews, you don't want to overdress.
That too.
Usually like so I've usually just worn a t-shirt to all my interviews, and like they don't really check for my pants, but but like
Please stand
I
up.
had one interview with a company called Schoenfeld in New York, and for that one they specifically let me know that their attire is business casual, and for that I had to dress up. But in most ones, like it, like you can usually wear like anything, just don't like wear a suit where it's not needed. And Chase, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. Lauren asked like if I could elaborate on overdressing. I remember for my first interview, I walked in with like a full like suit and tie. It's like I thought that's what you're supposed to do for interviews, and like I did well in the interview and I ended up getting the job. But I remember I was talking to the engineers afterward. They're like, "Dude, you look so stupid coming in here with like a tie." So yeah, I think a button-up shirt is probably good enough. Definitely don't wear a full-on suit unless they specifically ask for it.
Yeah, like Amaya said, some companies do have a dress code requirement or like guidelines before you go in for your interview.
If it's
If
for a
you're-
bank, you should definitely wear like office attire, like bring out the full suit though. I think because like when I applied to a lot of banks this year, they definitely look for that.
You should definitely communicate with your recruiter on that note. Typically, they'll tell you what they expect, and if not, you can always ask.
I think typically for girls, usually like a blouse and like maybe slacks or like a pencil skirt is usually good. So I feel like women office or women interview outfits are a little bit, they're a little bit less strict, but they can be a little bit like confusing because I know it was for me.
So I don't know if anyone here is like have experience in mobile development. Can you talk a bit?
Sorry,
What
could you
kind of
elaborate on
questions
the
do you have?
question?
So I'm thinking like if you have mobile experience, like working experience, like working in an app company, how does that feel?
I feel like in general, you're going to get a very similar experience, whether you're working mobile, full stack, back end, front end. Um, did you have questions about how to interview for a mobile position or more so about like the work life of it?
The work life.
Yeah, like I said, it's going to be very similar. You're still going to have stand-up meetings. You're still going to have demos. Yeah, I think it's not much different from other traditional positions except for the fact that you're working with mobile instead of web.
Okay. Should I prepare a portfolio of some sort?
If you have mobile apps to show off, that's an awesome thing to do. One thing I recommend, not just for mobile apps, but for all apps, is to take screenshots, take GIFs, videos of your project working. So that's very easy for recruiters to see your project in action.
Okay. Interesting.
I guess one thing about mobile, working in a mobile company. So I have experience working on iOS for Microsoft Outlook, and it's pretty much just, it's for faster releases. So you release like once every week compared to like once every month for other products. But it's basically the same, like Chase was saying.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions?
Yes. So I have no idea about lead code. Can you talk a bit about lead code?
Sure. We can actually do better than that. I can just pull up lead code.
Sean also has a question. As a freshman with
Yeah.
little programming experience, should I focus on learning more for right now and doing projects rather than applying for internships? I agree with Lauren. Do both.
Yeah, I think Lauren has the best answer for that.
Just do everything.
Okay, so basically this is lead code. I don't really concern myself with the rest of it. If you aren't familiar with concept, I'd recommend going into the explore category and then from there looking for like arrays, linked lists, whatever you're uncomfortable with, you can probably find like what you want to learn. And basically it'll give you some background on it and then they'll give you practice problems in that area. But in terms of practice, like you, so there's a premium version in which there's more questions. And like if you're prepping for a particular company, you can click on that company and it'll give you problems that they've seen coming from that company in particular. But in general, honestly, like you can just solve problems here. You just go to the problems category. And then once this loads, just pick a problem, start working on it. And then the difficulties are given to you. So you can flip it, address like some of the most difficult problems and also the easiest. There's also mediums. So really it kind of just, you can find problems that kind of like are at your level and then build up from there until you get better at it. When you go into a problem, I'm not going to solve this, it's way too hard. but like when you look at a problem, it generally starts off in Java or C++, but you can set it up to Python 3, which is probably what you're most familiar with if you're taking ICS 31. So basically you can switch the language to Python and it tells you like what the input is, what the output is. You can read the prompt here and then just go ahead and write a solution to it.
How much time should I spend on lead code?
Personally, like I don't really spend a lot of time on lead code. The way I do it is when I have an interview coming up, like if I know I have an interview coming up, I'll spend more time on lead code in the week leading up to that interview. But generally, like lead code is not like my daily thing. I know there's people who like do try to make it so that they do like 1 to 2 Lika problems a day and just like to keep their skills sharp, stuff like that. My brother actually does that. But personally, like for me, what works best is like coming up on an interview, I'll start ramping up on learning, on doing more problems on Lika.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to read what Chase said in the comments, or Chase, you want to say it out loud, that works too.
Sure. Yeah, I was just answering one of the earlier questions about applying even if you don't have previous experience. I think it's really, really valuable to still apply your freshman year because even if you don't land an internship, you still get a better understanding of the recruitment process and the recruitment timeline. Because what I see happen to a lot of students, they don't apply freshman year because they like don't think they're like qualified yet. Second year, they completely miss the recruiting window because they have no idea when it happens because they didn't do it their first year. And then by their third year, when they're trying to apply to internships, they're kind of stuck because they don't have prior internship experience. And it's kind of just this cycle that they get stuck in. So if you start early, you start applying early, even if you don't land an internship your freshman year, you still get really valuable experience of going through the interview process and of understanding the timeline that'll help prepare you for your later years in college.
Thanks, Chase. So between internships and undergrad research, which one would you recommend?
Shit.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat the question?
So between internships and undergrad research, what should I do?
It depends on your kind of like your career goals on that one. So for I do both on campus. It really depends. Like for example, like if you want to go to grad school and your goal is if your goal is at any point to go into the corporate world, internships will always help you more than research will. But if your goal is to become a PhD or even do a research master's afterwards, then I definitely recommend having some research under your belt just to like one, see if it's the right thing for you, and two, it's like very valuable experience and you get a good referral going into master's or PhD programs.
I understand. Thank you.
So since we're getting a bit off topic, we're gonna wrap it up, and basically we'll be on the Discord now for Hack Nights. And if you have more questions, feel free to come there and ask more questions. We'll be more than happy to talk to you. All right, thanks y'all.